3rd of September, 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. Sermon on Psalm 105 verses 1 to 6, 23 to 26 and 45, and Romans 12 verses 9 to 21. Psalm 105 was written to relate the early history of Israel, from the call of Abraham to the Exodus. It's the second of a set of 3 psalms, the first telling of the Lord's qualities and his creative power, and the third continuing Israel's history as they travel through the wilderness towards the promised land. Our passage begins with a song of worship, calling others to join in praising God for his glorious name, his miracles and his judgments. It goes on to tell how Israel entered Egypt through the influences of Joseph, and how several centuries later Moses was called to bring an obedient people out of bondage into their promised land. It's one of those passages that rehearses the preliminaries of our salvation, the various characters who in one way or another were links in the chain leading to Jesus Christ. The individuals who appear in Genesis or Exodus are either Jesus' distant ancestors, such as Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, or they play a part, sometimes a pivotal role, in protecting the emergent nation into which Jesus would one day be born. People like Joseph, who saved his family from a famine, and Moses, who rescued his people from Egypt. If we read only the early books of the Old Testament, we might think these stories are just for entertainment. We all enjoyed them at Sunday school. Or only concerning the people of Israel. But because we have the New Testament now, we can see how the various links lead eventually to our Saviour, to the establishment of the Christian Church, which also involves us Gentiles. By the time the Apostle Paul was writing his letter to the churches in Rome, Christianity was well established, long enough for things to be going wrong a little. And so Paul includes in his letter some admonishment and advice regarding Christian conduct. This advice was clearly needed in Rome, where there was often strife between the Jewish and Gentile Christians. But it's no less necessary for us. The society in which we live presents many challenges to us as Christians, and, with such a multiplicity of denominations, strife between Christians is also not unknown. Our passage jumps straight in with a call to sincere love. There's no value in two-faced friendship. Christians must love one another. It's Christ's greatest commandment, and their love must be true and faithful. Added to that is the injunction to be devoted to one another and to honour each other. Paul then makes the obvious sounding statement that the church members must hate evil and cling to what is good. What does that mean in practice? It surely means not dwelling on evil, not being in a hurry to listen to gossip and pass it on, not dwelling on news items that involve depraved or degrading conduct, not seeking immoral or violent entertainment. This is not to go around with our heads buried in the sand, unaware of or unconcerned about the realities of the world in which we live, but to keep ourselves from being drawn into such things in such a way that our standards fall. Instead, we must seek what is good, uplifting, moral, self-sacrificing, virtuous, and beautiful. Serving God, according to Paul, involves zeal, spiritual fervour, being hopeful, patient in affliction, being faithful in prayer, showing mutual generosity and hospitality. Clearly, we would also include giving freely to others outside the church, though in Paul's mind, with the church in danger of persecution and with so much need, his fellow believers were his priority. Nevertheless, one way in which we demonstrate God's love to those who do not yet believe is by being open-handed, quick to give support to those who suffer. During the pandemic and the subsequent economic difficulties that many now face, the churches have been exemplary in revealing God's love. It's a good way to preach the kingdom. Paul then gives the Christians in Rome the difficult command to love their enemies, reiterating what Jesus himself had said. This goes against all our natural inclinations, but it is clearly a Christian duty. We're all familiar with stories of Christians bravely facing lions in the Roman arenas, accepting severe persecution, just as Jesus himself had submitted to his tormentors, never reviling. Today also, Christians in many countries face similar enmity and persecution. In Western countries such as ours, enmity is more subtle, generally in the form of apathy, derision, minor inconvenience. We need to take Paul's ruling seriously, though, not retaliating and not seeking legal action as some notoriously do. A few years ago, during the case of a seriously ill baby to whom doctors thought it best to give only palliative care, a Christian organisation, together with the Christian Legal Centre, got involved in supporting the parents' case against the hospital. Whatever the motivation of the Christian group, in the subsequent court case, the judge accused the Christian barrister, Paul Diamond, of talking ill-informed nonsense, and another Christian barrister of being full of vituperation and bile. In the face of such an appalling witness from so-called Christians, I'd hesitate to apply the name Christian to them. They seem to have betrayed our principles in a shocking and public manner that can only have done damage to the reputation of the church as a whole. Action which flies in the face of Paul's injunction not to repay evil for evil, to be careful to do what is right, to live at peace with everyone, not to take revenge. We can safely leave issues in God's hands. He sees everything. He will repay where it is warranted, but we are absolved of judging for ourselves. We can trust him. What we Christians are called to do is to minister one to one another, weeping with those who are in grief, rejoicing with those who have cause to be joyful, to be full of zeal as we go about our lives as Christian followers, to be faithful in prayer and patient in affliction. This last is not always easy. Christians are no stranger to affliction. They're no more immune to depression, illness, tragedy than anyone else in this troubled world. But we have a God who can sustain us, and we understand his purposes to establish his kingdom of which we are subjects. It is far easier to be patient when we know the end of the story. All will be well in God's kingdom. This is the kingdom that the Lord had in mind when he called Abraham to be his friend, or when he commissioned Moses to tackle Pharaoh in order to bring about the release of the Israelites from Egypt. God knows the end from the beginning, and he's been patient over the intervening centuries while his purpose is worked out. What a privilege we have in understanding that we cannot fail, that nothing can harm us ultimately, and that our God will sustain us and bring about our ultimate good.